My name's Sam Parsons. I manage the Balcaskie estate for the Anstruther family. We started our conversion process fairly late in 2016, so we're newcomers to this, and we've just gone through that initial period of conversion. So the farming business here is about 3,200 acres that we farm in hand, and we started our conversion with the sort of easy hits of the livestock. We were predominantly an arable farm with suckler beef, and through long-term planning for the family business plan, they decided that actually organic production was closer to the route that they wanted to go down over a sort of 50-year period. They wanted to move away from conventional farming, and so we set about trying to work out how that was actually going to be delivered on the ground, and trying to change a business quickly and properly, but for the long run, it takes time, takes a bit of planning. So the decision to go organic was made in 2015, and in 2016 we were successful in getting the first AICS scheme for organic conversion, and we started that year by converting the land that supported the livestock. We had around 300 suckler cows. We didn't have any sheep, and we grew arable crops. Converting the livestock was relatively straightforward. We were pretty low input, so we just made a few tweaks to stop spreading fertilizer. Otherwise we continued doing much the same thing. Our herd health plan didn't really change a lot. We still used more or less the same products. And we were changing the system, but we weren't changing our mindset particularly. We were just organic because we were no longer using fertilizer. As that development continued over the following few years, we started growing organic cereals. We started to increase allowing flock onto the farm. Latterly, we just brought pigs on, and we're growing a wider variety of still cereals, but a wider variety of cereals now for a market. We learned that there's an awful lot more to it than just being organic, that actually the mindset change it's required. We got very used to being told what to do when we were conventional farmers by our agronomist or whoever else was advising us, and then they would sell us the product to rectify it. When we went organic, that stopped happening. People didn't drive up the drive anymore and tell us what to do. We had to go out and find that knowledge from other people who were already doing it. So the phased approach that we took was really to manage lack of knowledge on my part as much as anything. Whilst I thought I understood organic farming, I didn't want to go whole hog into it and make it a fist of a large area. So we took a phased approach, and we'll finish that in 2022. So it's going to take, it will have taken 6-7 years to get from top to bottom of the estate. And part of that reticence to do the whole lot in one go was we were an arable farm with a few livestock, and we were going to become a livestock farm with a little bit of arable. And for that, we needed a lot of infrastructure, whether that's fences, water. We needed physical livestock on the ground. We needed to change our system, and we needed to change the way we farmed. And so whilst we probably could have ticked the box and said we were organic on day one, we needed time to actually get the farm up to long-term ability to handle a stocked organic system. Obviously, as we have decreased our arable area, as we increase our fertility building crops, we needed to work out how that was going to affect cash flow, staffing, fixed costs, all the other things that go with it. And we needed to manage that gradually rather than in one fell swoop. It sort of fitted with retirements and changes of machinery and that kind of thing. We didn't have to do it all in one go. The financial implications of the conversion were a huge concern to me early on, because I could see that we were going to lose out the gross margin of all the cereals we were growing, and I couldn't really work out where these were going to come from in the early years of conversion. Well, we were reliant pretty well solely on output of red meat products, and we couldn't really build those enterprises fast enough to replace that income. So in the early years of the organic conversion, the AICS payments were essential to try and first of all, pay for some of the capital infrastructure we needed, and then secondly, to try and boost the coffers to keep the wheels rolling afterwards. What's become apparent is now we're in that system, now we're running, now we've got our fences, we've got our livestock, we've put our water pipes in, we've planted our grasses, we've changed our system, that the economics of the farming business are now more resilient than they were before. And that's fundamentally down to the fact we're spending less. And so we can afford to take some knocks and hits along the way that we couldn't have done in a conventional arable and livestock system. So other than the sort of experience that we've had to date, which has been a successful one, we started to realize there was more to this than met the eye. There was a lot more to organic farming. It wasn't just binary, you either are or you're not. There were different ways of doing it. And along that way, we have learned from other people who are doing things, they've been doing them for longer than us and they're better at it than us, about all sorts of other aspects of improving soils and regenerative farming. And we're practicing things now I never thought we would even be dreaming of doing in 2016. We're now Pasture for Life accredited. We're growing heritage cereals for specific end markets. We're mob grazing all our cattle. These are things that we're sort of out in the distant. I knew about them, but I certainly had no intention of doing them early on. They've now become core parts of our business and core parts of what we do. And all of those things have helped us become more resilient, and both financially and environmentally, and climate, and all the other things that we're conscious of. And they've mitigated some of the risk that I thought we would have going. Really, our market became red meat. At the same time, people were banging drums about red meat being disastrous for the environment, and veganism being a growing market, and etc. I was worried that we would be heading the wrong direction, but actually the organic market and the pasture-fed market is growing. The slides in the background are really relatively just sort of placeholders. There's an example there of our mob grazing system that we trialled. That was the very first year we did it. We trialled a small area. We're now doing all our livestock on that basis. Lots of things we've learned along the way are that the organic farming system requires complexity to work well, and a conventional farming system requires simplicity and scale. So we were sort of getting off one treadmill and we were getting onto another, which meant that we required people that were involved in this business to become open-minded, to be looking at ways of doing things differently, not to just be following the crowd. And that has taken a while. It is a real challenge for all of us. We've relied heavily on bringing in other people. We became we became a soil association field lab, partly because it gave us access to other people who were either interested or doing what we're doing to gain information from. And as I said earlier, the information coming to the farm, we had to go out and find it. It was no longer coming up the drive. And that's been vital, is having other people who are on an equivalent stage in the journey, or further ahead or further behind, to actually share knowledge. There's an enormous amount of knowledge there, and I realized there's an enormous amount of intellect in that knowledge, which was missing from what we were doing before. It was very much a sort of taking a prescription and following a list, and this takes a lot more reading around the subject and planning, and you've just got to be willing to learn again. Personally, I felt that the learning again, whilst I didn't really fancy it, actually is much more enjoyable than just doing what we always did. With the complexity, obviously comes the difficulty in how you make that economically viable when it's a small scale. You always start something off small scale. You can only afford to do that if you're making enough money in the rest of the business to actually trial something new. But because the costs are so much lower to entry for these trials that we're running, actually you can afford to set aside a small area and trial something much more easily. You don't have to be an expert in it. You don't have to have all of expensive equipment, or you can just try it. And we learned that the failure rate is much lower organically than it was conventionally. partly because we're not pushing crops, we're not pushing the land as hard. So the difference between a success and a failure is much less in organic farming than it is in conventional farming. Really, all this is only possible when you have changed your kind of initial mindset, rather than just doing what you did before without chemical, but understanding about soils and understanding about the interactions of what happens below the ground as well as above ground. We've had to change some fairly major parts of our business to try and do this properly. And photograph there is our Lincoln Red herd. So we changed our breed from a conventional, Sin-Ling, continental cross native breed. We've actually gone down a Lincoln Red pedigree herd route now, because we're looking for an animal that will withstand 12 months of grazing and will fatten and forage. We no longer feed cereals to cattle because it's not economically viable, not for any other reason. And we are looking at how we can maximize their grazing seasons. And so here's an example of bale grazed over winter. These cows, we outwintered over 300 cows this year, brought them in the first week in March to calve. No, most of them are back out again, or the ones that have calved already are back out again. So we're changing some fairly fundamental parts to the business, which is possible because the economic return is there when we do these things. And we were making lots of small changes before in our conventional business, lots of very small changes every year to try and eke another £5 here and 2 pence there. And actually that wasn't making a big difference to the bottom line. This system change is making hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of difference to the bottom line. And we needed that to happen to try and protect our business in future. In future, we will inevitably end up becoming more complex, but the complexity in adding change to what you do becomes less worrying. Once you've learned to make change, making more change is really just another daily job. And so we would like to bring in more enterprises. I can see us having more pigs, more hens, more veg, more. I can see us doing more of this. We become a much more mixed farm rather than just a large monoculture. And so I think that change over the next few years is inevitable. The market's certainly moving in that direction, whether that's the supermarket or whether that's the wholesale or the consumer direct. Much more interest in it, and I don't see that changing in a hurry. I think people have become fairly skeptical of the food chains that exist currently, and I think this is something that we took note of early on to sort of align ourselves with something that we felt had more credibility. But I think if anybody's interested in conversion and certainly heading down that route, I can't recommend enough. Get off the farm and go and have a look at somebody else and see what they're doing. You almost have to force yourself to do it. There's never a good time to leave a farm. But the amount I've learned, the confidence I've got from going to see somebody who's already doing it and realizing it's not a big change, or it's possible, or there's somebody else you can pick up the phone to, has been vital. And if there are any questions or anybody would ever like to come and have a look, I'm more than welcome to. I never profess to be an expert in this. We're learning along the way, more by mistake than by anything else, but it's a much more enjoyable journey to be on.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. That's really interesting and insightful.